When a person disappears on the water, investigators look for physical traces, wreckage, debris, flotation devices. But when Lynette Hooker disappeared off the coast of the Bahamas in April 2024, something else became the centerpiece of this investigation. Data. A GPS track recorded on Brian Hooker's personal electronics that mapped exactly where his body went the night his wife vanished. And that track tells a story that does not match anything Brian has said publicly, anything he told the Coast Guard, or anything he described to authorities. It shows stops he never mentioned. It shows landfalls he never disclosed. Coast Guard records show one account. Brian's personal GPS shows another. And the difference between those two stories may be the key to understanding what happened to Lynette that night. Lynette Hooker was the kind of woman who prepared for the water. She was a strong swimmer. She kept a seat cushion in the dinghy every single time they went out because she understood that the ocean does not negotiate. She was a liveaboard sailor, someone who had chosen that life deliberately and lived it fully. She anchored off the Bahamas. She knew the sea. And on the night of April 9th, 2024, she went out on that water and did not come back. According to Brian, it started at a restaurant near Hopetown. They got in the dinghy, rough water hit. Lynette went overboard. He was blown across the bay. He eventually made landfall near Marsh Harbor. One direction, one path, one landing. He radioed the Coast Guard. The search began immediately. Days passed. Nothing was found. Not Lynette, not her cushion, not her dry bag. A flotation device designed to never sink. Gone. And with it, questions. 2 days after Lynette disappeared, Brian called a friend named Blaine Stevenson, a fellow boater who had known him for years. That call was recorded. And on that recording, Brian described the night his wife vanished. He talked about rough water. He talked about a flare pistol. He talked about bailing out the cockpit. But here is where we need to stop. A dinghy does not have a cockpit. That word belongs to a larger vessel, a sailboat, a yacht, the kind of boat you live on. And for sailors who have spent years on the water, that distinction is not casual. You do not accidentally call a dinghy a boat. The two objects live in completely different categories in the mind of anyone who has spent significant time out there. It is automatic, like mixing up your car with your house. You do not do it by accident. When a longtime liveaboard sailor heard that recording, he flagged it immediately. Because when Brian said he was trying to get back in the boat, he may not have been describing the dinghy at all. He may have been describing the soulmate, their larger sailboat, a different moment entirely, one that happened later, one Brian has never described to investigators or in any version of that night publicly. But the recorded call is not the most important thing anymore, because there is also the GPS data, and this detail has gotten confused in coverage, so we need to be very precise. The GPS track that contradicts Brian's account is not tied to the soulmate's navigation system. It is not the dinghy drifting on the current. According to accounts of how this tracking works, the GPS track is tied to Brian's personal electronics, a phone, a watch, something on his body that recorded where he went. It tracked his movements that night. And what it shows does not match anything Brian has told. Brian's account is straightforward. They left Hopetown. They got in the dinghy. Rough water. Lynette went overboard. He was blown across the bay. Landfall near Marsh Harbor. One stop, one direction, one landing. That is the narrative. That is what was reported to the Coast Guard. That is the version that has been consistent. The GPS track tells a completely different story. It shows movement south around an area near Lubber's Quarters, then east, crossing the bay, then a landfall, then movement again, then a second landfall before the final landing point Brian described to authorities. 2 stops in a story that was supposed to have none. 2 places where Brian touched ground that he has never mentioned, never explained, and never accounted for to investigators. These are not ambiguous areas. They are specific geographic coordinates. They are documented. They are real. Stop and sit with that for a moment. Your phone records where you go. Not where you say you went, where you actually went. There is no interpretation in GPS data. There is no memory failure. There is no confusion. The device either recorded a location or it did not. And if you tell Coast Guard investigators one story about your movements that night and your GPS track shows something different, that is a significant problem. Not because accidents do not happen, but because the discrepancy is specific. It is documented, it is verifiable, and it exists in a case where a woman is gone and her flotation device never came back. A device that should have surfaced. A device that should have been found. The reason this matters becomes clearer when you look at another detail from that same night. The AIS tracking system aboard the Soulmate, the automatic system that continuously broadcasts a vessel's location to maritime traffic, went dark for 9 to 11 hours on the exact night Lynette disappeared. Maritime systems are designed to be automatic and continuous. They require deliberate action to turn off. And yet, on the night a woman disappeared, that system went offline for hours. But here is where it gets more complicated. The AIS system went dark, not just that night. It went dark at least 3 more times between April 10th and April 13th. Brian Hooker was in the custody of the Royal Bahamas Police Force from April 8th through April 13th. He was detained. He was not on that boat. He was physically unable to touch the Soulmate's electronics during those blackout windows. And yet, while investigators were actively questioning Brian inside a police station, the Soulmate's tracking signal disappeared again. Multiple times. While he sat detained, somebody turned that system off deliberately. And nobody has said whose hands were near it when they did. The GPS track showed 2 landfalls Brian never mentioned. The AIS system went dark while Brian sat in a police station. The story Brian told authorities does not match where his personal electronics placed him that night. These are not ambiguous details. They are specific. They are documented, and they form a picture that investigators are still building. Lynette Hooker prepared for the water the way someone prepares for something they respect. She kept that cushion ready. She was a strong swimmer. She did not leave her survival to chance. The one piece of equipment she trusted to bring her back to the surface, that flotation device designed specifically to never sink, to always float, to always be found, has never been found. And the story about how she went into that water, according to the GPS track that recorded exactly where Brian went, does not match what he has said. The discrepancy is not minor. It is not a matter of poor memory. It is 2 entirely different narratives recorded by 2 different sources on the same night. The Coast Guard obtained a warrant to access cloud-stored footage from the FLIR thermal imaging camera mounted on the Soulmate. That footage does not disappear. It does not vanish. It exists on a server tied to a serial number waiting to be examined by investigators who understand what they are looking for. And whatever it captured on the night Lynette went into the water has not been made public yet. But it exists, and it will be reviewed. When that footage breaks, when the GPS data is fully validated against the physical search evidence, when this investigation moves forward with these details, this case will shift because physical evidence does not lie. Digital data does not lie. The story Brian told investigators and the story his electronics recorded that night are 2 different things. And somewhere out there on the Sea of Abaco, in water that has given back nothing of Lynette Hooker, investigators still know where to look because a flotation device that cannot sink does not vanish. It did not go there on its own. Something put it there. And the GPS track is now pointing toward what that something might be. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. It is possible that explanations exist that have not been made public, answers that belong to a courtroom and not to speculation. But the GPS track, the AIS blackout, and the cushion that never came back are all pointing in the same direction. Investigators know this. The evidence is there. The data is documented, and the case is being built systematically. This is what happens When a woman who prepared for the water, who respected the ocean, who did everything right, disappears, and her story becomes bigger than the moment she vanished. It becomes about the investigation that follows. It becomes about evidence, about data, about truth. If this case matters to you, if Lynette Hooker truly matters to you, subscribe for the next update. We will be here when the investigation moves, when the evidence is validated, when this case breaks. Breaking cases, following every lead.